Okay, so I just wanted to comment that yesterday was the yard site. Besides being the yard site of Mrs. Klein, who was Bency Bench's grandmother, who the broadcast was sponsored on her behalf. Besides that, um, there was a. Besides that, there was the yard site of a Yid by the name of Reb Chaim Brim. Reb Chaim Brim was a Zokin. He was a Rosh Koil. He was a Rosh Yeshiva, and he was a Talmud Muvik of Reb Isser Zalman Meltzer, and of the Chazon Ish. He was close with all of the Gedolim of previous years. He was a holy Jew, and when I first came to Eretz Yisrael to learn, the first Shabbos that I was in Eretz Yisrael, I was invited for a Shabbos to Rabbi Yosy Lipschitz. He was a Raman then. And he told me, Yossi, I think it would be a good idea for you to go ask Reb Chaim Brim for a Charusha. So I said, who's Reb Chaim Brim? Like, well, who, what, when? I didn't know who this man was. He was like from the Gedolei Yerushalayim. So he said, well, the reason why I think you should is because he has an opening now, because the Zman that I came to Eretz Yisrael, Laser Wyman left Eretz Yisrael. And he said that Laser Wyman had a Chavrusa shop with Reb Chaim Brim, and being that he left Eretz Yisrael, I know there's extra time. And he's like an old Gadol from Yerushalayim. I mean, it's an opportunity of a lifetime. And he told me how it came to be that Laser Wyman got to learn with Reb Chaim Brim. So in our days, when boys used to go, or anyone used to go from Yerushalayim to Bnei Brak, rather than take a bus, near Kikar Shabbos, there was a stand. We would call it a taxi stand, but in fact, it was what we would call a sheirut stand, not sheirut like bathroom, but sheirut, where they had these taxi cabs, and you would join together with a group of people to go. They had those Mercedes extended limousines, no luxury limousine by any stretch of the word. So they would be able to get 6 people, actually 7 people, because there are 2 rows of seats of 3, plus someone in the front. 7 people would be able to squeeze into one of those cars, and everyone used to pay 1/7 of the price. So Laser was once in Bnei Brak for Shabbos, and Matzah Shabbos he ran out quickly to grab a shirut, and he's waiting there online for a cab. So the first 7 people get the first car, and then the next 7 people get the next car, and there was an old man waiting with him. And in the group of people that were waiting, there was also a woman. And this old man didn't want to sit. So the normal thing would be, if there's 1 woman and 6 men, the normal thing to do would be for the woman to sit in front, and then the 6 seats in the back would be occupied by men. But there was this old man there who refused to sit behind the woman. And he said, no, I can't sit behind the woman. And Laser was just in a rush to get back. So he said, enough of your nonsense, let's get going already. This man said, no, I will not sit behind the woman, until he was willing to pay for 2 seats, so that he would pay for the woman's seat if the woman would be willing to go, or I guess they couldn't fill the car if it wasn't for the woman. So he was willing to pay 2 seats. This way, the woman would take her own car, go in a different car with women, and this way he would sit in the front, and he wouldn't have to worry about sitting behind the woman. And that's what he did. So the whole way, Laser was like shepherding with him. So are you excited? You got to sit in the front? It's fun. You like that? You like sitting in the front? And the whole way he was like shepherding with this old man. And then as they're pulling into Yerushalayim, everyone has to pull out their wallet and pay. Laser realizes, by mistake, they rush to leave. I left my wallet in Bnei Brak. So how is he going to pay? So the old man says, don't worry about it. I'll lay out the money for you. You can pay me back. So after he's like taunting this guy the whole time, the guy offers to lay out the money. So Laser says, okay, but I have to pay you back. Where do you live? He says, don't worry. You can come to the Meir Sharm Shtiblach, and you can ask anybody for Chaim Brim, and they'll already tell you where I live. So Laser Wyman tells him, die meinst, dass jeder Mensch, was davent in der Meir Sharm Shtiblach, ken jeder Schnorrer, was dreht sich dort herum? You think everyone who davens there knows every schnorr that hangs out there, referring to Reb Chaim Brim that tell as a schnorr? So Reb Chaim says, Reb Chaim Brim says, Hanish Chamoide, met mich wissen, met mich kennen. So Yosy Lipschitz tells me the next day, Laser Wyman asks Yosy Lipschitz, who is this Chaim Brim? So Yosy Lipschitz says, Oy vey Laser, tell me what you did this time. So of course, Laser ran back with the money and apologized to him, and begged him mechila. So he started talking to Laser, and he asked Laser, what do you learn? He said, I learned the mirror. So he says, why are you learning the mirror? So you get to hear shmuzin from the famous Rav Aryeh Finkel. So Laser says, nah, when Rav Aryeh Finkel gives shmuzin, I do my laundry. So Chaim says, what? How can you do laundry? You know what? You're going to learn with me Musar every week. And then because of that, Laser Wyman had a seder with Chaim Brim. So Yosy Lipschitz told me, knowing you, I think you'd be a good shidduch. Now that Laser's not there, you go learn with him. I says, how am I supposed to do it? He says, go ask him. So I go to the Meir Shalom Shtiblach, and I asked him, where does Reb Chaim Brim live? They told me he lives right across the street from the Shtiblach. I went inside. I would knock on his door. He answers the door. Can I help you? I said, yes. I said, first of all, I have a grudge from Laser Wyman. I'm sure Laser wouldn't have minded that I made it up. And I said, now that you don't learn with him anymore, I'd like to take over his time. So Reb Chaim said, I'm sorry, I really don't have time. I'm not able to learn with you. So I was in a do or die position. So I told him, listen, I came from America. I want to learn with you, and I'm not going to give up. So I'm sitting here in your house, and I'm not going to leave your house until you promise me that you're going to learn with me every week. So he says, okay, sit here. And he ignored me, and he kept on going. After about a half hour, his wife says, I said, no, I'm not going to leave unless you promise to learn with me. Finally, Reb Chaim Brim said, okay, I'm not giving you a Seder Kavua, meaning we're not going to learn the same time every week, but I will learn with you every week, and you'll call me every week, and I'll tell you when to come. And that's how I got my Seder Kavua with Reb Chaim Brim. So it was his yahrzeit yesterday, Zecher Tzadik V'Kodesh L'Vracha. There was a period of time where he used to daven for the Amud in Square in New York. And legend has it is that from the moment he got into the car, into the cab, to go to the airport in Mei Shorim, until the moment he pulled up into there, he would keep his eyes closed. He was a very holy Yid, a very special Yid, and he also had a very good sense of humor. Like every Erev or Shchodesh used to go to the Beis HaKforos to visit his parents, his grandparents, and his in-laws. So he always told his wife, I saw your father. He really looks good. He used to always say that to her in Yiddish. Okay, gewaltig. Okay, there's another fabulous story, but it's already 6:11, and we have a very, very challenging daf today. So today's daf is really a continuation of the analysis of R Chisda. So I want to review what R Chisda said and what Reb Shravia developed it into, and then we will tackle today's daf. So really, today's daf begins a couple of blot ago, which is by the Mishnah, which was on, I believe, Nun Dalet Amud Beis, where it actually goes from Nun Dalet Amud Aleph onto Nun Dalet Amud Beis. So just a moment, I'm going to go back to Nun Dalet Amud Aleph and then to Nun Dalet Amud Beis so that we get this crystal clear. So I'm going to go to Nun Dalet first. And it says in the Mishnah is listing off the tumois that are not Soiser Naziris. We had first a long Mishnah that discussed all of the tumois that are Soiser Naziris. And then we're discussing tumas, and there could be tumas deraises, real tumas meis deraises that you need zrika for. Nevertheless, because of the Gzeres HaKosov or the Halacha L'Moshe Sinai, they don't Soiser the Naziris. When I say Soiser Naziris, what I mean is they eradicate all of the days that were counted for Naziris up until these tumas occurred. And once the person deals with the tumah and is matar himself and brings his karbonis and gets his taglachas, he has to count fresh, starting from the beginning. He has to reset the clock. So the Naziris and the tumos that we learned in the last Mishnah forces the Nazir to reset the clock. The tumos that we're going to discuss on Daf Nun Dalet Amud Aleph, these tumois do not force the Nazir to reset the clock. So he suspends his Naziris while he's Tomei, and he has to be Matar himself, and then he can continue counting. So let's have a look at some of the items in the Mishnah and the Mishnah's psak regarding them. So it says in our Mishnah says on Daf Nun Dalet, Schachos Prois Beis HaPras, Eretz Amim, Goel Doivik, Revi'is Dam, Roiv HaTzomois, Keil Noigah B'Beis. Now I want to focus on Uvemei Sifrei, Uvemei Gomra. the halacha of Mitzvah, it's important that we understand exactly what the cycle of Mitzvah is and how it works so that we could get clarity in today's Gemara. A Mitzvah is someone who finds some type of rash or some type of condition growing on his skin. He shows it to the Kohen, and the Kohen looks at him and tells him if it's a nega or not. The Kohen has three options when he sees this nega on the person. Either he could say, it's nothing, and he goes back to his daily schedule and the story's over. Or he could say, it's tameh, and then the Nazir has a process that he goes through when he's tameh, which we'll get to shortly. Or the third thing he could say is, I'm not sure, it has some simone tuma, but not all. You need to quarantine yourself and quarantine yourself for 7 days, and I'm going to come back in 7 days and re-examine. And if after the re-examination in 7 days, he still doesn't have clarity, still doesn't have the simone tuma, then he quarantines for a second set of 7 days for a total of 14 days. And after the second set, the Kohen has to make his determination. So either he says you're not tameh, or he says you are a mitzayra that's condemned as a mitzayra who's tameh. Now, even a mitzayra that was under observation, he's tameh as well. He has all the dignity of tumah of a mitzayra who is confirmed to be tameh. As a matter of fact, the Gemara, I think it's Megillah, the series of Ein Bains, the Gemara says, Ein Bain mitzayra muskar, the mitzayra muchlat, ella, ... It lists off what those differences are. But for the mainstream, the main ideas, there is no difference between a mitzayra that's merely under observation to a mitzayra that we know for sure he was condemned. Now, once a mitzayra is condemned, he has to wait until the condition heals, however long that takes. And when the condition heals, the Kohen comes and says, yes, it's healed, and he doesn't walk scot-free. There's a relatively complicated process that a Nazir, that a mitzayra has to go through to terminate his tumah. So just to put things into perspective, someone who touched the sheretz, all he has to do is go to the mikveh, a very simple tire process. Someone who touched the mace has somewhat a more complicated tire process. He needs to get spritzed with the water of the paraduma on the third day, on the seventh day, then he goes to the mikveh, and then he's tahor. A mitzayra is a lot more complicated. What has to happen is, once he's healed, he goes to the Kohen, and the Kohen shaves his entire body. He does a Gillette track too, across the entire body from top to bottom, and then he has to wait 7 days, and then he does another round of Gillette track too. Am I aging myself by saying that? And he has to do another full round of Gillette track too, and then after that, on day 7, when he did that, he can go to the mikveh, and then on day 8, he could bring karbanos, and then the Nazir walks. So there's 3 stages of a Nazir. There's a Nazir under observation, and that's called a mitzayra muskar. He's locked up, meaning he's quarantined. Then there's the stage where he's condemned. That's called a mitzayra muchlat. And once he's healed and he's in between the two taglachases, he's called a mitzayra b'mei sfarei. He's in the days of counting. So with that, let's read the Lashon HaMishnah. Uv'mei sfarei, when the Nazir when the mitzayra is counting between the two haircuts that he got, uv'mei gamrei, and during the period of time where he is condemned. It's chronologically out of order. Really, he's first in the time of Gemara, when he's on mitzayra muchlat, and then he's counting. But the way the Mishnah presented the Meisvari when he's counting, which means between his two haircuts, the Megomer before his first haircut when he's still Tomei Gomer. So during those days, Al Elu Ein HaNazir Megaleach. If someone becomes a Mitzayra, he's not Megaleach. What does it mean he's not Megaleach? Of course he's Megaleach. He's a Mitzayra. He doesn't have a din taglachas because of his Naziris. His taglachas is there to deal with his tzara status. On the other hand, if someone became a tamei mace, a proper tamei mace, so then he has to be matayr himself which takes about 7 days, and then he goes to the mikvah, and then he has to take a haircut, but that's to satisfy his naziris. So there, the taglachas is a process of the naziris to tumah. So naziris to tumah, meaning a nazir that became tumah tumas meis, there's also a special process triggered. He has to be matayr himself, and he needs a haircut. This haircut that the tzara takes is only to deal with his tzaras, but it doesn't trigger any taglachas that's required because of the fact that he's a nazir as well. So surely those words of the Mishnah are not referring to the Mitzayra, they're referring to the other tumas that we mentioned in the Mishnah. And then let's turn over the daf to see what else the Mishnah tells us about this. And the Mishnah also tells us the Einoi Soiser as a Kodim, meaning if before he became a Mitzayra, let's say he was a Nazir for 30, he was Makabal Stam Nazirs of 30 days, and he counted 15 days, and then he became a Mitzayra, so you suspend his count, and when he finishes dealing with his Tzaras, he continues. So he has 15 days in the bank. After he finishes being a Mitzayra and he deals with his two taglachas, he can start counting again, and now he has to resume his count to finish off the last 15 days, but you still can consider the earlier 15 days. What I'm saying now is for information purposes only. It's not accurate. But just to simplify things, I'm going to explain the Mishnah that way. So he already kept 15 days of his Naziris. He does not lose those days. If he became Tamei Tumas Meis, he would have lost those days, and he has to count them all over again. But if he became a Mitzayra, he does not lose those days. Rather, when he finishes dealing with his Tzaras, he can resume counting. He just has to put his Naziris on pause. And therefore, the moment he finishes dealing with his Tzaras, umaschil umoyne miyad, he can start counting right away. Now, up until this point, the Mishnah dealt with a Nazir muchlat, a Nazir that I call him condemned, and then the Nazir who's in his entire process, and he's in between his two taglachas, which the Mishnah refers to as b'mei sifra, in the days that he's counting. What about when he's under observation, when he's under quarantine? So now the Mishnah addresses that. Not only do they not soiser the original Naziris, you actually can count those days as well. So while he's in quarantine, so just put into perspective, he was Makabal Naziris for 100 days. He did 20 days worth of his Naziris, and now he goes into quarantine for 2 weeks. So those 14 days, he can still continue to count towards his Naziris. If he becomes a mukhlit after those 14 days and he gets condemned, so then he suspends his counting, and he only can continue after he's matayr himself from the Mitzayra. But the days that he was in quarantine, he actually can include as part of his count. How do you know all these things? Today, at the end of the Gemara, we're actually going to learn the Makar where the Mishnah knows us from. There'll be a long brisa that we actually learned already once in the past that we're going to learn again today that teaches us where the Mishnah got this information from. Okay, now, R Chisda came along on Daf Nun Hey Amar Aleph. So let's move on to Daf Nun Hey Amar Aleph. And R Chisda taught us a very important finish. R Chisda taught us on Daf Nun Hey Amar Aleph, all the way at the bottom of the Daf. He said, you might think that the reason why you have to put the counting of the days of your Naziris on pause is a structural issue, meaning while he's a Mitzayra, those days don't count. Zok R Chisda, that's a misconception. That's not true. Really, even those days do count. So why is it that the Mishnah says they don't count? Why does the Mishnah say you have to put your counting of your Nazir days on a pause? Zok R Chisda, it's only because of a technicality. What's the technicality? When a Nazir shaves his head for a Naziris to Tahira, when a Nazir shaves his head as part of the process of terminating his successful term of Naziris, his hair has to be grown for at least 30 days. Since his hair has to be grown for at least 30 days. That's why you can't count the time of Naziris. So for instance, let's say he was Makabal Naziris for 30 days, and after 15 days, he contracted Tsaras. Really, during the next 15 days, as he's dealing with his Tsaras, in fact, those would be perfect days to count as part of his Naziris. But the problem is, at the end of his Naziris, at the end of his Tsaras, he's going to take 2 haircuts, and he's going to shave Gillette track to his entire body. Because of that, he can't now discharge his Naziris, because in order to discharge your Naziris, you have to have a Giluach of Naziris. You need a third Giluach, because you can't double dip. Even if it's a Gillette track 2, it doesn't count as 2 cuts. It's 1 cut. So therefore, you need a separate haircut per. See, the barbers are very well supported by the Torah. You need a special haircut for each function. So you need 2 haircuts for your Saras, and then you'll need a third haircut to discharge your Naziris. You can't use the same haircut to discharge both. And the haircut with which you discharge your Naziris has to be a haircut with a growth of 30 days. So because of that, you end up not being able to use the time that he was a Mitzayra, because after his Mitzayra is finished, he will have to wait another 30 days to discharge his Naziris at the Hira, because he needs that haircut. So Reb Chizda is saying, our mission is not saying something structural, that you cannot use the days while you're a Mitzayra to count towards your Naziris. No, of course you could. It's just a practical technicality that you're not going to be able to take your haircut to discharge it. And yesterday, we learned a Kasha that Rab Shravya asked on Reb Chisda, and that's the third to the bottom line on Nun Hey Amud Aleph, and it says as follows. I'm sorry, on Nun Dalet Amud Aleph. I believe it's Nun Dalet Amud Aleph. Is it Nun Hey? It is. It's Nun Hey Amud Aleph. I'm sorry. So Reb Shravya asked. It says in our Mishnah, Maschil u'moyne miyad. That's the Mishnah we just learned. You can right away resume your count after you've discharged your Tsaras. And the fact that he became a Mitzayra does not reset the clock. So if he didn't become a Nazir until day 15, those original 15 days count. We only lose the period of time that he was the actual Mitzayra. So Frek Reb Shravya b'mai, exactly under what conditions is our Mishnah talking about? If it's been Naziris Muetes, if we're talking about a Naziris that was only 30 days to begin with, well then Kaboish Gidol Sir, meaning never mind that you cannot use the days while you were a Mitzayra. You can't even use the 15 days prior to when you became a Mitzayra, because you have to wait another full 30 days. So when our Mishnah says you get to reclaim the time that you counted Naziris before you became a Mitzayra, you just don't get to use the time while you're a Mitzayra. It can't be speaking where his total Naziris was 30 days, because after the Tsaras, he has to wait 30 days to be able to discharge his Naziris. And our Mishnah clearly says that you get to keep the days that you counted before you became a Mitzayra. So that can't be pshat in the Mishnah. Ella, going on to Daf Nun Hey Amud Beis, Reb Shravya points out it must be that our Mishnah must be referring to a case where you were a Nazir for a very long time. So let's say he was Makabel Naziris for 100 days, and let's say after 40 days he became a Mitzayra, and it took him a month to deal with it, and then he, in that period of time, he had his 2 haircuts. There we say that he could resume counting. If he started 40 days, he doesn't get to count the time that he was a Mitzayra, and then post Mitzayra, after his second haircut, he can continue counting the 60 days that he owes. There, he's not going to lose any of his original time, because if he has to count another 60 days, he'll have plenty of hair growth. And a lot of Naziris Meruba, Vikatani Maschil Umoyne Miyad. The Mishnah must be speaking by Naziris Meruba, and it says that he resumes his count. According to you, Reb Chisda, why does he merely resume his count? Why can't he even, according to you, Reb Chisda, there's no reason structurally why he can't use the days that he was a Mitzayra to count towards his Naziris. The only problem is he cannot take a haircut unless he has 30 days of growth. Well, in this case, where he has plenty of time for his hair to grow after he resolves his Tsaras, according to your understanding of Chisda, he should have even been able to count the days that he was a Mitzvah. That was the Kasha from our Mishnah that we learned yesterday on the Chisda. So Rab Shravin said, "Who moisav lo b'mufarkla b'neziris bas chamishim yoyim b'yosef esron b'seilida b'teras megalech tzaraitai b'hadi yosef talson yoyim the Nazir to isla gidol sai." And what Rab Shravi said is that our Mishnah is no longer in a broad case. Our Mishnah, in fact, is only in a very unusual, unlikely, limited case. And that is as follows. We'll stick to Rab Chisda's principle that structurally the days that you're a Mitzayra, you can use towards your Naziris. It's only a technicality that you need 30 days of growth in order to discharge your Naziris of Tahira. So let's look at three scenarios. The scenario that I want to look at first is a Naziris Mu'etes, which we refer to as a Naziris of 30 days, or better said, a Naziris of 30 days, which we refer to as a Naziris Mu'etes. If you were only Mekabel Naziris of 30 days, and in that period of time, you became a Mitzayra, so in essence, the Tzaras totally wiped out and reset the clock, because after your Tzaras, you're forced to count a full 30 days because of the growth. So there, although technically you could use all the days, but Lamaisa, you're going to have to start your Naziris from scratch after you deal with Tzaras. So in that case, you could say that the days of the Tzaras actually are like a Tumas Meis, they actually wipe out the original count. That's one scenario. The other scenario is he was Makabel Naziris of 100 days, and he got his Tzaras at day 40. And if he got his Tzaras at day 40, according to Reb Chisda, and according to the Mishnah as well, after he finishes dealing with Tzaras, he still has plenty of time to do his Tagalachas, and therefore, we'll say that the days that he was a Mitzayra will count towards his main count. And therefore, he actually didn't lose 1 minute of his Naziris count while he was a Mitzayra. While he was a Mitzayra, he was counting concurrently towards his goal of Naziris. But our Mishnah is speaking in a unique case where it works out that he cannot count the time that he was a Mitzayra, but he could count the original date. And what does that mean? It's speaking in a case where in his Naziris, by the time he finished his Tzaras, it worked out that he only had exactly 30 days. So no matter how long his Naziris was, if it was 50 days, if it was 100 days, it was 2,000 days. He got his Tzaras 30 days before the end of his term. So now let's think about it. If he got his Tzaras 30 days before the end of his term, he's going to go through his Tzaras, and then he's going to have his second Taglachas. From there, he has to count 30 days. So Kum Techais, only in that very specific scenario, he's not losing any of the previous count. He's only losing the time while he was a Mitzayra. And they can't count towards the final 30 days, not because of a structural issue, because of a technicality. Because whenever he finishes with his Tzaras, he still needs 30 days in order to do the Taglachas. So in essence, what we're saying is, we're picking such a unique case where it's a long Naziris, but he got his Tzaras exactly 30 days before the end of his Naziris. And only in that very limited case is what the Mishnah is referring to. And in that case only, you count all the time that you racked up before you became a Mitzayra, but you don't count the actual time that you were a Mitzayra because you need to make up those 30 days. And that is how Reb Shravia explains the Mishnah according to Reb Chisda. Now the Gemara is going to have two bomb kashas on Reb Chisda. Neither of these kashas are going to be answered, and as a result of that, we'll have to abandon Reb Chisda, and we'll have to say, in fact, that structurally the days that he's a Mitzayra will not count towards his Naziris. The case that we're going to use is very, very complex. And as Rabbi Bornstein calls it, I listened to him yesterday, he says, let's not call it complex, let's call it fun. So it's very, very fun. Zok the Heilige Gemara. Mosiv Rami Barcham. Nazir Shahayatame Pisafik Umuchlak Pisafik. This is a Nazir who he's a Safik Tumah. He's not sure if he touched the mace, and he's also not sure if he became a Mitzayra. So the way I express this case is he's a Suffolk Muchlet, and he's a Suffolk Tummy Mace, but he's for sure messed up. He might be a Suffolk Tummy Mess, but he's a very messed up. And let's just discuss how this could occur. Suffolk Tummy Mace is logical. It's a Suffolk if he came in contact with a mace. Suffolk Mitzayra, how are you a Suffolk Mitzayra? You either a Tummy or the Kohen, either said you're Tummy or not. So the Chachamim talk about it. So some people learn that there were two Mitzayras who went to the Kohen. He said, you're Tummy, you're Tar, and they got confused. And when they left, they forgot who was pronounced Tummy, who was pronounced Tahar. And this guy happened to be lucky enough to be a Nazir at the time as well. And the Kohen's not around anymore. And that was the case.
Isn't there a lag time between when the Kohen looks at it and he marks it out, and then he looks at it a second time?
That's only if when he looked at it the first time, it was missing some of the Simone Tuma. But it is possible in certain scenarios where the Kohen would be able to condemn it at the first visit.
Yeah, but it's possible that he doesn't.
Correct.
So that would he be a Suffolk
Tameh? No, he's a Vadai Muskar, and he has all of the halachas of a regular Mitzayra, other than certain halachas that's discussed in the Mishnah I believe, in Megillah, where it talks about the Ein Beins. And our Mishnah makes a distinction, is that a Mitzayra Muskar, for sure, those days do count towards his Naziris, and even using R Chisda, where it's never a structural issue, it's a technicality, it's because after someone's a Mitzayra Muskar, if he ends up going free and clear, he doesn't need a haircut. So the technicality of the haircut does not exist. Because a Mitzayra Muskar, meaning he was under observation, and then he passed and he didn't have to become a full-blown Mitzayra, he will not need a haircut. He'd still have to be Mitzayra himself, but not with a haircut. Okay, so let's see Rabbi Bachama's issue. So he brought a brisa. This Nazir was Tamei Misavik and Muchel Misavik. So the halacha is turning over on to Amid Beis. I'm sorry, turning on to Nun Vav Amid Aleph.
The Mefarish says, "V'sufik Eloi em nechlat v'nerpa b'yavrish shel Nazirosa." It's a suffix if he Taka became a Mitzayra and was healed right away.
Okay, so that's how he learns. So there's different ways to deal with the suffix. I'm avoiding that for now because the complication that we're dealing with, I don't want to get into any other things. But thank you for bringing that up. So the halach is Olchel b'kachim la'achar shishim yoim v'shoysi yayin u'metamal amesim la'achar mei ve'esrim yoim. It seems like such a benign, harmless 2 lines of the Gemara, but really there's a very good chart in the art scroll for it. But I'm going to go through this. There's a lot of sveikas here. We have to go through the possibility that could happen. So you have this fellow who's a Vadai Nazir. He's a Suffolk Tummy Mace and he's a Suffolk Mitzayr. So let's look at it. Best case scenario is that he's not Tummy and that he's not a Mitzayr. He's just a Nazir. If that was the case, so let's say he was a Nazir of 30 days, which is what we're talking about. After 30 days, he would need his taglachas, and he's Ois Nazir. He's perfectly fine. I'm not going to get into the herbanus that he has to bring to discharge his Naziris, to discharge his Taras, to discharge his Tumas Nazir. That's a whole new level of complication that the Gemara is going to discuss in a couple of blatter. So we'll put all that aside for now. Let's just focus on how the taglachas impacts his getting out of the mess that he's in. So best case scenario is that he did not become tamei at all, not with saras, not with mace, and after 30 days he could get his taglachas and he could drink wine. He could drink wine. He could be tamal mesim. Karbanis, a nazir is allowed to eat, so it's not relevant. A nazir tamei, a nazir tahar. Okay. Next case, it's possible that he's a nazir tamei. If he's a nazir tamei, what has to happen? He has to get a haircut. He has to be matar himself, which he does in 7 days. He has to get a haircut, and then he's got to start counting another 30 days. Now, let's say it was only a Suffolk Nazir Tamei, and he for sure wasn't a Mitzayra, but he's a Suffolk Nazir Tamei. He can't take a haircut right away because he might be not a Suffolk. He might be a Nazir Torah. A Nazir Tamei is allowed to take a haircut as soon as he's matar himself. But a Nazir Torah is not allowed to take a haircut for 30 days until the period of Naziris is over. So if we only have a suffix, if he's a Nazir Tahar or a Nazir Tameh, he has to wait 30 days, then he could take the haircut. Now that haircut, we don't know if it was to discharge his Tumah, because we don't know if he was Tameh, or if it was discharging his Naziris. So he has to take a haircut after 30 days, and then he's got to wait another 30 days, because just in case he was Tameh, the second 30 days is when he's really recounting his Naziris. That's if he was a Nazir, that's if there was only a suffix between a Nazir Tameh. What if we know for sure he wasn't a Nazir Tameh, but he was a Nazir who was a Mitzayra? So then, if we knew for sure he was a Mitzayra, well then without any delay, he could go through the Tahira process of the Tzaras and take the two haircuts. Because even though a Nazir Torah may not take haircuts, there's a carve out that Torah says that a Mitzayra, even though he's a Nazir, may take those haircuts. But here, we don't know that he's a Mitzayra. He's only a suffix Mitzayra. So what would we have to do? The first haircut that he would have to take to discharge his Tzaras would be after 30 days, because just in case he's a Nazir Tahar and he's not a Mitzayra, he would have to wait 30 days. He's not allowed to cut his hair for 30 days. He's got to wait for 30 days. Then, just in case he was a Nazir Tameh, then he has to recount his Naziris. So now, in order to take the next haircut, he has to wait another 30 days to count his Naziris. So he still needs two haircuts. The worst case scenario is that he might be a Nazir Tameh, and he might be a Nazir with Tzaras. So let's look at it. The first 30 days passed. Now, this happened to have occurred right away on the first day, this incident with his Tumah. So the first 30 days pass. He's going to take a haircut. We don't know if this haircut is to discharge his Naziris of Tahira, because if he wasn't a Mitzayra and he wasn't Tameh, then the story's over. After 30 days, he's done. But the problem is, he might be a Mitzayra. If he's a Mitzayra, then the first thing you deal with, if someone's both a Mitzayra and he's Tameh, you cannot deal with the Tumah until you deal with the Tzaras. So we'd have to say he might be a Mitzayra that became Tahar. So we'll have to attribute the first Tagalachas to his Tzaras. That cannot occur until 30 days, because he might be a Nazir Tahar. Okay, so he did the first Taglachas. That first Taglachas might have been discharging his Naziris, because he might have been Tahar. He might be Tameh, and this Taglachas, he might be Tameh and not a Mitzayra. Therefore, this Taglachas might be what's resetting the clock, and now he has to start counting his Naziris. Or it might be the first of the two Taglachas that he gets if he's a Mitzayra. So that's the first Taglachas. Now he's going to wait another 30 days, and he's going to do the second Taglachas. Why must he wait another 30 days to do the second Taglachas? Because if he was a Nazir Tameh, the second 30 days is the period that he's counting for his Naziris. So he tells his second Taglachas. Now, just in case he was a Mitzayra, automatically the Mitzayra grabs the first available Taglachases. So now he's done two Taglachases, he's discharged his Tzaras, but he still might have Naziris of Tumah to deal with. At this point, after 60 days, he has discharged his Tzaras, and therefore he's allowed to eat Kachim. Because out of all these people, it's only the Mitzayra that could not eat Kachim. Okay, and then actually a Tamei Meis, he's not a Tamei Meis anymore, because he would have went to the mikveh and had a tzazah long ago. He just didn't finish the Naziris complication of the Tumah. So after 60 days, after he had two Taglachas, worst case scenario that he was a Mitzayra, he's totally discharged from his Tzaras. He can now eat Kachim, but he still has his Naziris to deal with, because even though he had two Taglachas, and he might only have dealt with his Tzaras, now he's got to deal with his Tumah. Now, just in case he was a Mitzayra and he was not Tameh, now he has to start counting 30 days for his Naziris. So he can't just take a haircut. He's got to wait 30 days, because now he might be counting his Naziris of Tahira. So he waits another 30 days, and he takes a haircut. It's possible that third haircut was to discharge his Naziris of Tumah, and now he's going to start counting his real Naziris of Tahira. Or it's possible that he wasn't Tameh, and in fact, that third Taglachas was his Taglachas discharging his Naziris of Tahira. Then he has to wait another set of 30 days, which is a total of 120 days, because this way, the first Taglachas was Tzaras 1, the second Taglachas was Tzaras 2, the third Taglachas would have dealt with the Naziris of Tumah, and the fourth taglachas would have been the Naziris of Tahira. So if you look at the worst case scenario, and being that it's a suffix, you have to treat this as worst case scenario. You're going to have to wait 120 days till we discharge his Naziris. So that's based on a Naziris of 30 days.
If he makes his all haircuts, but he doesn't bring any karbuns, it can't be karbuns.
I don't want to talk about that. We'll talk about variations.
What does it have?
This is too complicated. I'm sorry, Chaim. This is too complicated to talk about any what ifs. Let me finish the whole Kasha.
Does the haircut without any karbuns help?
Let me first finish the Gemara's Kasha, and then we'll talk. Okay. So the Gemara tells us, the Brisa tells us, if we're talking about a 30-day Naziris, in order to discharge all of the Sveikis, you need to wait 120 days. V'tani Allah, and just in case you thought this wasn't fun enough, let's add even more complication to our scenario so that it'll really be fun. V'tani Allah, b'medavar mamurim, where will 120 days, in other words, 4 periods of Naziris, be adequate to discharge every scenario? Is Naziris muates? If his original Naziris that he was makabel upon himself was what we call Naziris muates, meaning a Naziris of 30 days. Avol Naziris bashana. What if this fellow, when he was makabel Naziris, he says Harei Nazir for 1 full year? Well, now the 4 periods of Naziris that he has to count are 4 years. Therefore, just like in the first scenario, after 2 periods of Naziris, he was able to eat kachim. There it was 2 periods of Naziris equaling 60 days. Here, 2 periods of Naziris is equal to 200 days because each Naziris is 100 days. But Tuma, discharging his Naziris, he has to wait 4 years, or what we consider 4 periods of Naziris. Frek the Gemara, v'salken daitet, salken le yoimi. If you hold that really the days that he's a Mitzorah, he could count towards his fulfillment of his Naziris ditahara, then you shouldn't need 4 years. V'salken daitet le yoimi, then tiski le then even worst case scenario shouldn't extend his Naziris to 4 years. It should only extend it to 3 years and 30 days. And how do you get that? You get that with a simple calculation. Remember, we're looking at worst case scenario. So we have already established that the worst case scenario, we have to assume that his first taglachas after 100 days was going to deal with the taglachas of Mitzorah number 1. After we waited the second 100 days, the taglachas is dealing with number 2. Now, the next thing based on the worst case scenario was dealing with the taglachas of Tumah. How long does he have to wait for the taglachas of Tumah to reset the Naziris to start counting again? Really, all he should have to wait would be maybe 30 days to take his Naziris, or even less. So all he should really have to do is wait 30 days. Now, he can't, because he can't take a haircut after 30 days post dealing with the Taras, because if he was a Nazir Ditahira, we said that now he has to start counting his term of Naziris. But let's think about it. If you hold you cannot count any of the days of the Taras towards his Naziris, then you'd have to wait a full 100 days till you can take your next haircut. But if you hold that the days of Tsaras do count towards his Naziris, and it's only a technicality, like R Chisda said, that you need to wait 30 days before you can take a haircut. So let's think about it. When you're up to your third taglachas, there's 2 options. You're either a Nazir that was Torah, that never became Tamei Tumas Meis. If that's the case, all he needs to do is wait 30 days to take his taglachas. Because according to R Chisda, all the 200 days that he counted towards his Tsaras also count towards his Naziris. So he paid his 100 days of Naziris twice already, and he's fine. Now he just has to wait 30 days to get his haircut on technicality. Now, if he was a Nazir Tamei, well, then he has to wait 30 days to take his haircut, to discharge his Toma, and then he has to wait another 100 days because this might be his Naziris. So the longest period of time, worst case scenario, shouldn't be 400 days, according to R Chisda. It should only be 330 days. Elamai, from the fact that Brisa says you need a full 400 days, it's proof positive that the days that he was a Mitzayra do not count towards his Naziris. And that is the Kasha on R Chisda that the Gemara does not have an answer to. Okay, so that's the Kasha. Now, Reb Chaim, I'm sorry, I didn't want to divert. What were you asking before?
What does it help making taglachas without bringing karbonis? If it's taglachas.
Very good Kasha. You do have to bring karbonis, and how you bring the karbonis to fulfill it, that you can go weiter, is going to be the subject of the Gemara in a couple of blot. And I didn't want to deal with the karbonis now, even though they're very relevant, because that would overcomplicate it. But in fact, karbonis are very relevant. Which karbonis he has to bring and how he brings a carbon and a suffix, that's very much what the Gemara is going to deal with. But let's get this clear. Let's just only look at the taglachas now, and we'll worry how the karbonis fit into this later in a couple of blocks. But that's a very valid point, but it would add a whole new layer of complication. So I couldn't focus on it. Okay, we're going to stop here, even though we barely scratched the surface of this daf. I just felt to try to even get an understanding of this kasha, we had to really focus on the building blocks. The next kasha on Rabashi, the next kasha for Rabashi, which although it's almost a full block that extends from here all the way onto the middle of Amabeis, is a very simple kasha because it's a brisa with a lot of detail, but we're only going to use one small part of the brisa for the kasha. It'll be very simple, so we'll be able to learn it very quickly tomorrow. But for today, I wanted to focus on getting clarity on this kasha that was asked to R Chisda. So hopefully it was a little bit clear. Okay, shkoyach everybody. Have a wonderful day. Be'ez Hashem, tomorrow I'll be back in person. So Chaim, just if you look under Ran's, if you look at Tyson, what he says is he's a Suffolk Mitzayra, right? He can't a Mitzayra after his tire needs to bring an Asham and a Behemoth Asham, and he has to bring a Chatos, and he has to bring an Oila. So the halach is, even if he only brings one of those karbanas, it could discharge them. It could discharge the tzaras. He still owes the karbanas. But as far as eating kachim, one of them he can be brought, and you're allowed to bring a chatas oif on a sofik. A chatas oif, even though a chatas behem you can't bring on a sofik, a chatas oif you can bring on a sofik, or some of the karbanas you can bring on a t'nai. If I'm mechuyev, the oila should be a oila schiyah. If I'm not, it should be a nadava. So there's ways to bring all the karbanas with t'noim that you'll be yotzei, not your full chiyuv karbanas, but you'll at least have been able to brought enough karbanas that you're allowed to be matamal, that you're allowed to discharge in Naziris, or that if you're Mitzayir, you're allowed to eat kachim again. So, and that's the Gemara we'll discuss later, exactly how you structure the karbanas, that you're bringing them on a suffix with a t'nai, that it'll work if necessary. Okay, shkoyach. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
You too, shkoyach.